Hello, welcome everybody to this Property Master webinar. As you know, we do these more or less once a month for our clients and anyone else who would like to join us from the private rented sector. So welcome everybody. What we try to do is to keep you up to speed with what is going on in the buy-to-let market, particularly in the buy-to-let mortgage market, and also, give you access to expertise that will help you in terms of your investment strategies. So I'm absolutely delighted to welcome back Martin Gain, who has been on one of these webinars before a little while ago. So hello, Martin. Lovely to have you back.
Hello. Great to be here.
Martin is actually a chartered town planner and a published author on the subject of planning. And he has his own consultancy as well, Just Planning. So he is a practitioner as well as a real expert in the field. And in actual fact, his book on planning for HMOs is out now, available on Amazon. And he's actually giving away free copies to you guys for the first 5 days. So from Monday to Friday, do log on and have a look at that book. I've read it myself. It's really, really good. Gives you fantastic insight. So Martin's going to be answering your questions on planning permission on HMOs, and I'm sure anything planning generally. So great to have him back. And as ever, we have our Chief Executive, Property Masters Chief Executive, Angus Stewart. And I'm going to hand over to Angus because, as he always does, he's just going to give you a little bit of a tour de horizon, as it were, in terms of what's going on in the buy-to-let market at the moment. And it's a lot, isn't it, Angus? So over to you.
Thank you, Christine, and morning, Martin, and morning, everybody. Well, we had another base rate increase a week or so ago, and I have to admit, I was shocked it was only 0.25%. I think there were a few of us in the market who thought that 0.5% was more likely, especially after the Americans increased their Federal Reserve rate, their equivalent to the base rate, by 0.75%. So we saw only a quarter, and as a result, I am confident that we've got more rate rises in the offing. So expect another rise next month. It's supposed to be August, but it wouldn't surprise me if we had something in the interim. So let's see what happens there. So what are we seeing? We're seeing lots of volatility in this market. Lenders are pulling rates on a daily basis, and repricing upwards. And as a result, it's we need to move quickly to actually lock in deals. And there's clearly an opportunity for people to lock stuff in at the current rates before they move up. But I know, for example, I've got 3 or 4 lenders who will be pulling all their products later this week. They've already told us. And so you need to move, and you need to move quickly. And we're also seeing that clearly the SBRs are going up, and some of the lenders, especially some of the smaller lenders, are actually saying to us their cost of funds are going up substantially. So although base has just moved by a quarter, I've got one lender who's putting up all their products by 3/4 later this week. So we are seeing some significant changes in this market. And that means that if you've got something that's coming up for renewal, it might be worth doing the maths to see if there's it's worth paying the early redemption charge. In some instances, it's worth paying to lock in. So depending on your situation, what you're trying to do, have a look. We're happy to help you. You can use our mortgage calculator to give you some guidance, but don't ignore the opportunities that are here at the moment, because I think we've got at least another 1% to increase in the next few months, and possibly more. Let's see. House prices, well, they've been going up, haven't they? I mean, the last statistics showed about 12.5% on an annual basis in April. I think we're going to see some leveling out. I think the increase in rates is going to, hopefully cool down this market. And there may be some opportunities for people in the latter half of this year. Let's see. I mean, I think a few of us have been wrong in the past. I mean, I know that before the COVID days, we all, when COVID first came across 2 years ago, we all thought the market was going to dip, and we've seen the opposite. So, it's always very difficult to be certain. Crystal balls are challenging, but I do think there probably is a bit of cooling off, and I think we've sort of hit a peak here. The other big thing that has been announced in the last couple of weeks is the government's renters reform bill. We've been waiting a long time for some movement from the government on this. Section 21 does look as though it's going to go, and that is clearly of concern to some landlords, especially as we don't know what the replacement's going to be. There needs to be something, some way of a landlord being able to repossess his property. But I can understand the desire that we've got here to give tenants a greater level of security. And I think this is all part of the government's plan of professionalising the marketplace by encouraging people with just ones and twos of property who might be accidental landlords to drop out, and having more professional landlords who want a continuity of tenant in situ to have the properties. So I think we're going to see some changes there. And but the devil is always in the detail. We don't have that detail, so we're just going to have to watch this space. EPCs, well, as we've been talking about in previous webinars, there is still appears to be this drive towards an EPCC, and that there seems to be no backtracking at the moment from the government perspective, which of course is challenging with all the other pressures that are on all of us at the moment in terms of inflation and other costs. So we're seeing lenders coming out with more and more green mortgages. Every month there seems to be another green mortgage from a lender. So if you can do stuff with your property to improve your EPC, it is worthwhile. But remember, there is a maximum cost in terms of doing that, and there are situations where you can actually register a degree of exemption. So finally, we've got Martin here with his wonderful new book on planning and HMOs. It is a good read, so please download it. And as Christine said, if you download it onto the Kindle this week, you can have it for nothing. So that sounds like a wonderful deal, Martin. And I'm sure you and all our listeners and everybody is keen to understand what some of the planning regulations are with HMOs, and what we can do as landlords in terms of preparing better for some of the changes that are coming up.
Fantastic. Thanks, Angus. Thank you very much. So yes, if you have any questions for Angus or Martin, just pop them in the chat box and I'll monitor the chat box, or there's the ask a question option at the bottom there. So, do take advantage of our experts and throw anything at them, mortgage or planning permission related, and we'll see how we go. But I've got a couple of questions kind of just kick us off. I'd like to start with the basics, really, Martin. I mean, how do we now define an HMO? What is the actual definition?
Right. Well, a HMO, obviously a house and multiple occupation, is any dwelling, a house or a flat, occupied by 3 or more sharers in 2 or more households. So if I and a friend of mine share a flat, a bedroom each, 2 people sharing, that isn't a HMO. But any more people in that flat or in that house makes it a HMO. So 3 or more people sharing effectively is the government's definition of HMO.
So, I mean, there must be instances of people falling into that. So does that happen?
Yeah, it can be quite tricky. It didn't really matter in the past because HMOs didn't really need planning permission or a license until they were bigger. So technically they qualified as a HMO under the definition, but it didn't matter because you didn't need any kind of license or planning permission or anything like that. But now the government has expanded licensing on the one hand and expanded planning controls on the other. So depending where you are in the country, you could run into trouble. So if I to go back to my example of my flatmate and I in a 2-bedroom flat, the 2 of us do not count as a HMO because it's only 2, not yet 3. But if a third person moves in, a partner, or we have a child, one of us has a child or something, then we're now 3 people in a shared dwelling, even though it's 2 households still. And if it's an area where planning permission is required for HMOs or licensing is required for HMOs, we would then potentially be in breach if we haven't done our homework and made the correct applications.
So it's got a lot tighter. I mean, what's the difference between a license and planning permission? Because I mean, are the 2 related? There are clearly instances where you need both. Then, from what you're saying.
Yes. So they're separate regimes. They're both administered by the local council, but they're 2 different departments, and in most cases they're totally unconnected. So I was a planner in local councils. We had no idea what the licensing people were doing or how licensing works, and I still now don't really fully understand licensing. So it's a mistake to think that if you have a license, you don't need planning, or vice versa. Both planning and licensing have been expanded. So councils have the power to require that all HMOs in their area need a license, as far as I understand. And similarly, councils have the power to require that all HMOs in their area need planning. But they're two different requirements, and if you have one, you don't have the other. So I'm very commonly told by clients, well, look, I have a HMO license. I have my license. Why are the planners coming after me? But that's an error. That's a misunderstanding. The fact that you have a license means nothing in planning terms. And people are surprised that you could apply for a license, the licensing people in the council will give it to you, and then sometime later the planners come after you for planning as if you've never been in contact with the council. But it's important to understand there are two different departments, and they don't cooperate or in most cases communicate. It's improving very slightly, but it's silo-based, these local councils. So the fact that you've one doesn't mean you don't need the other.
So it seems to be important to check it out then, isn't it, really? Yeah.
So
yeah, absolutely. So you need to inform yourself on both.
So just a question, Martin. There seems to be inconsistency here. If you're an owner-occupier living in your property and you rent a room out, that effectively is two households and potentially three people, a couple there with and that wouldn't require a license because that's under the rent-a-room scheme. Is that right?
Yes.
And it requires no planning to do that.
I think you're right, actually, that lodgers are exempt from the HMO for planning. So if you live there yourself and you have a lodger, or more than one lodger, as I understand that wouldn't create a HMO. Lodgers are one of the few exemptions.
Okay. So.
There's a question here from Tisha. So if I have a 3-bedroom flat and I rent them out by the room, do I need an HMO license?
Well, licensing isn't really my area, but my understanding is that you don't need a mandatory license. So the national legislation, you'd be exempt under the national legislation, but councils have the power to bring in discretionary licensing. So an individual council, if they feel that a certain area has too many even of these smaller HMOs, they can require that every HMO in their area, even one of 3 bedrooms, as in the example there, needs a license. And the same with planning. A council can decide, and we will get to this, but they can decide through an Article 4 direction that every HMO, even small ones in their area, needs planning permission. So if you have a flat, a 3-bedroom flat, and you think, okay, I'm going to rent to 3 students or 3 friends or whatever, you need to first check these days. In the old days, it was very unlikely you'd have trouble. But in the last 10 years, you would need to check, firstly, if your area has discretionary licensing, and secondly, if your area has an Article 4 direction in planning. Those are 2 different things. You might need both, you might need neither, you might need one. But you just need to check with your council before going ahead.
And how would Tisha be able to do that, Martin? What's the easiest way?
Well, the simple answer is to ring them up, but councils are collapsing under the weight of workloads at the moment, and everybody's working from home, and there's a resource crisis. So it's easier said than done, actually. It's a good question because it's tricky. If I want to find out if a council has an Article 4 direction, all I really normally do is go to Google and type in, Chelmsford Article 4 HMO and see what comes up. To be sure, you have to really go into their website, Google, search a bit, try and find where they have recorded their Article 4s and so on, or ring them up. But to be honest, good luck. These days, it really is tricky to get anybody on the phone and to get a clear answer, and they don't even know themselves sometimes. So I'm sorry, it's a bit of a vague answer, but it should be on the council's website, or there should be some way by which you can ring them up and ask, or email them and ask.
Wow. Angus, it sounds a bit difficult.
Well, I think it is, but I think go along to their website. Quite often you'll find that if there are areas with lots of students, I can think of bits of Birmingham, for example, where they have implemented, and there's a complete area. You can see the map on the council's website as to where they require licensing and planning and where they don't. And you just need to be aware of the challenges, because if you buy a property there without understanding, you may not get planning because they may turn around and say they have sufficient HMOs in that area. which I think brings us on to the potential for grandfather rights. My understanding is if a property has been an HMO and they then bring in this legislation, you have ongoing rights to continue using the property in that way. Is that right, Martin?
Yeah, so I think HMO landlords have to be a bit strategic. This has all happened since about 2010, and there's this creep of planning controls spreading across the country and tightening. So if you already have HMOs, or you're thinking of buying one that the seller claims this is an established HMO, as Angus says, you can check first if it came into place, if the HMO was created before the Article 4 direction came in, then it's safe because it predates the change in the rules. Or in any case, if it's been there for 10 years continuously, that's called a 10-year rule. It applies to whole loads of areas of planning. If something was unlawful or is unlawful, but it's been there for 10 years, then the council no longer can do anything about it. So if I went on Rightmove and there was a lovely HMO for sale and I thought, God, I'd love to buy that, I would first ask the seller or the agent, first I would check, is there an Article 4 direction or does it need planning permission? Because it may be you're fine. If there is an Article 4 direction or it does need planning permission, there are three things to check really. One is, would you get planning permission? But the other two are, does it predate the Article 4, in which case it's safe, or has it been there continuously for 10 years, in which case it's also safe?
Okay, let's just deconstruct this Article 4 thing, just to be absolutely clear. So what is Article 4, and is this a new move by local authorities?
Yes, well, so the key first thing to say is that there are two types of HMO. There's one with 6 or fewer people in it, and one with 7 or more people in it. So a smaller HMO, 3 to 6 people, is normally permitted development. So if you have a house, 4-bedroom house, 5-bedroom house, and you rent it to 4, 5, 6 people, you don't need planning permission. It's permitted development. It doesn't need planning permission. And that's nationwide. In Wales, they've removed that right entirely, so you always need planning permission. In England, councils have the power to take away that permitted development right. So in a local council area, say Nottingham, where they feel they've huge pressure from their little terraced houses being converted into student shared accommodation, they think we need to stop this. It shouldn't be permitted development in our area. We have an exceptional case to make that it shouldn't be. So we're introducing an Article 4 direction, and that takes away the permitted development right. So in that specific area, it could be all of a borough or district, or it could be a specific collection of streets or whatever. You would need planning permission for any kind of HMO. So any more than 3 or more people sharing. So they bring in the Article 4 direction. They normally consult on it publicly, like any planning legislation thing, and they normally give a year's notice. So you can act quickly if you're aware it's happening. So that's why it's a good idea to just be on top of your local area, check the council's website. If you know it's coming, you can create your HMO before it comes in, or you can apply for what's called a certificate of lawfulness to just get confirmation from the council that it's lawful and safe. You can also respond to the public consultation and make your views known and so on.
Yeah, it's interesting. Oh yeah, I'd set up a Google alert, I would, or something of that nature. So the minute the website is updated, you would know. I mean, that might be something you could think about. Some comments here from Tusha. Are there any penalties for missing such a process as there's no information? I mean, what can they do to you if you create an HMO and you shouldn't have done, and you didn't know that there was a prohibition on it?
Well, on the licensing side, I'm not sure what the penalties are. On the planning side, you may have no trouble because it only matters if the planners come looking, really. So if you have 3 people in a flat and they are not annoying the neighbors and there's no harm and no big problem, you may technically be in breach of planning, but until and unless the planners come, the enforcement team come and say, look, we're not happy with this, we're aware you're in breach, we want you to change it back to a family dwelling, just a family or 1 or 2 people living there. Until that happens, you're kind of okay. There's no penalty. It's not a crime, it's not an offence to be in breach of planning. It's just that councils have the power to take action.
Right.
And you may have to revert.
They may force you to convert it back, which obviously could cost you money. I mean, on the fines for licensing, I know there are fines. I think it does vary, but it can be quite expensive. Angus, I think it could be double figure thousands, can't it? If you are caught with HMO without a license.
Yeah, there are some significant fines for not having a license. There are some significant costs in getting a license as well, and they vary quite a lot depending on councils. But you could certainly pay £1,000 plus in some councils for a license.
Absolutely. From the lender's point of view, Angus, if one of our clients is saying I'm buying an HMO, what sort of documentation to prove that do the lenders require, if any?
Well, what would normally happen is the solicitor, we seem to have lost Martin for a minute, the solicitor involved would the solicitor involved would do all the checks, and as a result they would make sure that the lender's position is secure. So if you need a license or if you need some planning, then the solicitor would get involved to do that and make sure that before the transaction completes. And it does catch people out. We quite often get to the point where it's gone through the whole of the process, and we're waiting for an offer, and the offer's not there because there is not the right permissions in place. So
it'd be something like a certificate of lawfulness or something of that kind, I guess, is what the solicitor is looking for.
Absolutely. And I think Martin's still with us, but we can't see you, Martin.
Yes, I can hear you and I can follow fine, but I have disappeared from my own screen as well.
As long as you're there.
So
Angus is getting a bit worried then.
You might have to just listen without seeing anything. Some people would say that's a benefit.
Do you want me to try and invite you back in and see if your camera comes back on?
I don't know why. I wonder, is there maybe it was some problem with the Wi-Fi and it cut the video just to save bandwidth or something.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can move you out and bring you back in.
Okay. Perfect.
Let's see if we can do that. So yes, I think as Angus was saying, it is worth making sure you check these things out in advance. It was interesting what Martin was saying there. If the HMO predates the new regulations, you should be okay. If the HMO has been there for 10 years, again, that makes a big difference. But whatever it is, if an HMO looks like a good investment, it may well be. But if the investment is based on it being an HMO, it's obviously really important that you make sure it has the requisite license and planning permission, because otherwise you could get far down the road with a mortgage and find out at the last minute that you can't go ahead or you shouldn't go ahead. At least I'm sure that would be the advice from your solicitor. There we are. Oh, we're back. Thank you. Thanks, Martin.
Magic there. He's reappeared. So.
He's reappeared. So Martin, what do you have to do? I mean, say, for example, you already have a property and you're thinking, I could convert this into an HMO, and there are lots of good business reasons, higher yields, for example, that I might want to do it. What do you need to do to get that planning permission?
Well, the first thing I would do is check if you're in, it depends if you want to create a smaller HMO or a larger one. So if you're creating a HMO with up to 6 people, it's normally permitted development to change the use to a HMO, but you may need planning permission if it's an Article 4 area, and you can check that locally. If it's more than 6 people, 7 or more people, it's a larger HMO, and that always needs planning permission. So you always need to go to the council in that case. So if it's an Article 4 or a larger HMO, you'll need planning permission. And you need to check out the local planning policies. So the mistake people make is they think, well, the way planning works is you apply for something and see what happens. But that's really not the best way to do it, especially for something like this where it's not. There might be policies that rule out HMOs entirely in your area. So going to the trouble of drawing up plans and working out where you'll put the bins and all that parking and all that kind of stuff is wasting time, because at the very first step, it might be a no. So you need to get familiar with the policies. Now, you can do this yourself. Go on to the council's website, click on planning policies, and try and read them. It's a bit tricky. Now, my book, to give it a brief plug, has a chapter on this. So it guides you through looking up these policies and gives you examples and case studies of different parts of the country and specific regulations in places like Portsmouth and Nottingham and so on, where they have clear ones that are a good kind of guide to what is out there. If you need help, then there are planning consultants who can help, and some just charge a relatively small fee to go away for an hour and quickly give you a summary of whether you're likely to get permission. So the main thing is, number one, is there any in principle reason you can't have it? And there are councils that have brought in Article 4 directions, have done it because they don't want any more HMOs. So normally they back it up, they back the direction up with some enhanced planning policies to restrict HMOs in that area. So find out first if there's anything like that, and if not, then you can apply. It's worth applying.
And what are the sort of things that worry planners when you do ask for an HMO? What are the sort of things they're going to be particularly concerned about?
Well, the first is whether it's allowed in principle, as I was saying, and some councils have policies that say that they're trying to protect family housing. They have a concentration of HMOs and they don't really want any more. So that's the first thing to check. Then apart from that, the main thing the planners look at are environmental constraints. So they want to know, will you cause problems in terms of noise? Do you have arrangements for refuse and recycling? Because there'll be more in a larger house. Is there an issue with parking? And so on. So, and then the final thing that's become much more kind of a bigger deal recently is whether your HMO provides good enough accommodation internally. So that used to be a planning issue, a licensing issue, but now the planners have started looking. So they are keen to see that the bedrooms are big enough, there's enough communal space, a large enough kitchen diner and so on, and also that you have enough bathrooms per person and a garden and that kind of thing. So every council will have its own regulations, its own planning controls, and they're changing over time. New ones get adopted. When new ones do get adopted, they're generally tougher than they were because the general tide is towards tightening up on all of this. So you need to check really, and there are two ways to check. One is to look at the planning policies on the website, or get someone else to do it for you, or look at other HMO applications in your area. You can navigate to the council's planning website. You can bring up a list of the last kind of the applications in the last week or two that were decided, and you can have a look and see how were they assessed, what policies were applied, were they successful. That will give you a good guide to whether yours might be successful as well.
Oh, that's really good advice. So a question here from Christoph: how can you prove that an HMO has been there for more than 10 years in a scenario where the previous owner passed away and cannot bear witness? How do you prove?
This is an interesting one. So one of the problems is that people look at HMOs that are on the market for sale, and the seller says to them, well, this has been here 10 years, so you're fine. But the problem is the council won't take that at face value. You'll need to prove it. And it's difficult to prove because you have to prove not only that it's been a HMO for 10 years, but that it's been a HMO continuously for 10 years. If you stopped for a year and rented it out to a family again, you've changed the use back, you've restarted the 10-year clock. So you need 10 years of evidence for the, in some detail. So normally people provide tenancy agreements, bank statement showing rent coming in, tenancy deposit records, gas safety checks, maybe invoices for the cleaner who cleans the common parts every week, that kind of thing. So in the question they're asking that the previous owners passed away. So what makes it tricky is that when you're buying, you're relying on the seller giving you all this info. If it's your own HMO for 10 years and you have all that data somewhere, you might spend a few days, digging into your emails and your records, hassling your letting agent and so on, but it'll all be there somewhere. The problem when you're buying is that you don't have all that information, and the seller doesn't have the same incentive to provide it, and you can't be sure they're telling the truth and so on. Now, particularly if the owner has passed away, they can't sign a witness statement, but what you can do is ask for all of this information: tenancy agreements, bank statement showing rent received, maybe a letter from the letting agent saying we've been letting this for so long. You can show emails from the tenants giving you notice when they were moving out, giving them notice when they were moving out or moving in, or complaining about maintenance issues. You just need to tell a story of full occupation as a HMO for 10 years.
Yeah. So that's actually useful advice. A lot there to think about, Christoph. Hopefully that was helpful to you. Tush's issues, I think, is with Westminster. I'm guessing, Tusha, you've got property in Westminster. It seems you might have a 3-bedroom flat there. And this is more about licensing, though. I think, Martin, can you see Tusha's comments there?
Yeah.
Do you have a...
Right. So, I mean, this is kind of happened. I have buy-to-lets in Ealing in West London, and they've written to me to say that they've extended discretionary licensing to cover the whole borough, and mine now require a license. So it's something I'm kind of having to work out as well, and it's not specifically my area. So it looks like what the viewer is saying here is that Westminster has also expanded discretionary licensing to cover 3-bedroom flats, and that it looks like they now require a license. So unfortunately, if that's the case, they will need to get that sorted.
Yeah, I mean, I think looking at Tusha's situation, if he was renting it to a family, he wouldn't need a license. But exactly the same 3-bedroom flat, if he's renting it to 3 individuals who are sharing it, he does need a license. And my reading of what you said there, Tusha, is you will need a license from Westminster.
Yeah. It's interesting also your comment there, Martin, because you and I were emailing on this. I think it was Devon Council, or one of Devon's councils, actually are now making stipulations about the size of the room before they would grant permission, even though that's already laid down in national legislation, but they can vary that if they want.
So the one thing councils are getting quite interested in is the quality of accommodation. So they are, where they wouldn't before stray into that area, they saw it as a licensing issue. They are now taking just concerned that rooms are big enough and that the quality of accommodation is good. So what they can do, well, firstly, they can refuse any planning application on that basis anyway, because there are just generic policies that say you must provide good quality accommodation. But what they're doing on top of that is they're bringing in specific extra planning guidance that lays out very strict criteria. So there are, I mean, I've seen some guidance in some areas that specifies how many washing machines you have per person, and that requires you have an area internally to dry clothes, and so they can be quite specific. And if it exists, all you have to do, of course, is comply, because one of the mistakes people tend to make is not to be fully informed, not to read these documents, which, it's a bit bureaucratic, but they're not that difficult to kind of read and understand. They're fairly straightforward. And then they apply without meeting all this criteria, and then naturally it leads to a refusal. So, planning guidance isn't absolute. You don't have to follow it if you have a good reason. An exception can be made. You might say that, look, in this particular case, we can't, one of the rooms is a bit undersized, but it's the constraints of the house and blah, 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 and we've compensated by making the sitting room bigger or something. So it's not absolute, but generally speaking, that guidance is expanding, and it's better to follow it if you can.
Yeah, there's a question here from David about Nottingham here. Martin, I'm purchasing a property in an Article 4 area in Nottingham next week. The property is a traditional 3-bedroom semi that's been used for the last 40 years as a chiropodist. The council tax ban was deleted in April 1993 and described now as an office with storage above. Does Article 4 prohibit me from changing to a 6-bedroom HMO from a commercial property?
No. So Article 4 applies only to changing dwellings into flats or houses. So one angle when it comes to HMOs is to convert commercial premises. The reason the planners are kind of challenging HMOs more these days is because they don't like losing family houses. They have a stock of family homes and they want to keep it. And secondly, they're a bit concerned about the backlash from HMOs popping up in residential areas, because councillors are elected by the voters, and there is pressure in some areas from voters who are concerned about 10-bedroom HMOs in a quiet suburban street and comings and goings and all of that. So the beauty of commercial premises is you're not losing a family home, number one, and number two, they're not usually on quiet residential streets. They're normally in the town centre or whatever. So you are you rule out, or you get around a lot of the key problems that make HMOs a little bit controversial. You also, most planning policies, where councils have brought in strict planning policies, they're normally in relation to converting houses. So commercial, it doesn't apply. And the other thing is that commercial premises already have negative environmental impacts. shops have parking needs. They're open late. They can be noisy. They cause activity. So you can argue in a planning application, well, actually, this office had 10 staff and 20 visitors a day and had 4 parking spaces, and our HMO that we're proposing will be actually no worse or even better than the existing situation. We're not creating harm in that sense. The only thing to look out for is that councils could have policies protecting office space. So in a local area, if they feel there's a shortage of offices and they want to encourage space to be available for young companies to start up and create employment and stuff, they could have a policy saying, no, we won't allow offices to be converted. So you'd have to check that. That's the only thing that might trip you up.
That's interesting, because I was going to ask you about commercial property and into HMO. So Angus, that's quite interesting for our clients to know, isn't it?
Well, I think there's lots of, I think it's useful to know that, you're less likely to get an issue with planning in converting commercial into an HMO than you would for a residential into HMO. So that's very helpful. One question I've got for you, Martin, if you do get turned down for your planning on HMO, what's the likelihood of getting something through on an appeal? I mean, you talked about that situation just there with commercial, if they want more commercial offices available and therefore they've turned it down. Is there an appeals process? What sort of grounds could you use for an appeal, and what's the likelihood of getting something through?
Yeah, well, with any planning refusal, you've a right of appeal, and that goes to central government. So it takes it out of the hands of the council, and it's free from interference and stuff. So people sometimes say to me, what's the point in appealing? They'll just make the same decision. But actually, no, it goes to a totally separate central government body, and it takes it away from local politics and stuff. With any planning refusal, the thing to do is look at it and really understand what's happened. So another thing I notice with clients is sometimes they say to me, I've been refused because they don't like the noise or something, and I read the decision and actually it's something different. So you clearly can't make the right decision unless you have a full understanding of why it was refused. And there's an officer's report with every planning decision that goes into quite a lot of detail about what's happened. So read that, understand exactly what's going on, and then try and work out whether it's a fair refusal. If you've been refused, you always think it's unfair, but try and be dispassionate and look at it and go, right, did I just not read the policies properly? Is there policy support? Is it fair or not? And if you think, and you may need advice from a planner, and if you think, well, the council has pushed their luck here, they just don't like the idea of HMOs, but they don't have the policies to back it, they're being unfair, then you should appeal. And appeals are free to the government. They take about 6 months. And in my book, I do a full chapter on appeals and recent decisions. So I looked at all HMO appeal decisions in a 3-month period, and tried to draw out lessons. And the result was that about 40% were successful, which is a good proportion. It may seem a little low, but actually a lot of appeals point that some people don't put in very strong ones. So so actually 40% is quite a high rate, and some are more successful than others and stuff. So it's worth have a look at the chapter, and you'll see all the different issues and whether or not it's the kind of thing that gets through an appeal. But it's definitely worth considering. You shouldn't take a refusal lying down. You need to check it. If the council are right, they're right. If they have strong policies and they've applied them fairly, and you're just losing out, well, then that's fair enough. But if they haven't applied them fairly, or you get a little bit of kind of prejudice against HMOs, some case officers just don't like them. They don't like the idea, and they might have got a lot of complaints from neighbours, and they refuse it without maybe full planning policy support, in which case you should appeal.
Excellent, interesting. Question here from Rob. Do HMOs have to have a reception or a communal room? Would that be part of what planners would look at, or is that more of a licensing issue, or both?
It's probably more of a licensing issue, and I'm not sure what the rules are. My understanding is council licensing teams are pretty good at responding to these kind of questions. They're open to talking to applicants and stuff, and can send you a list of their requirements, just very clearly, minimum room sizes and stuff. In planning, if you needed planning permission and were applying for planning permission and didn't have a reception room, it's likely, I think, it would be refused, because they now apply this kind of idea of having good quality accommodation, and it's difficult. The idea is that people share some kind of space, and If you had very large rooms, you might get away with it, if every room had a sofa or something. But a normal house with normal bedrooms, I think you'd be expected to have some kind of, even a kitchen diner where people could congregate.
So it's something definitely to check out, Rob, and it is going to vary, but I think you might find that it's something you need to think about.
I think the one thing I would say is, if you're looking at buying a property and you're looking at making it into an HMO, do check the room sizes, all the room sizes, and those which are. We have had situations where, going from mortgage to valuer, the surveyor goes round and, one of the rooms is below the minimum for an HMO bedroom, even if it's a child, whatever, and then the thing gets thrown out from a mortgage perspective. So be very clear that you're meeting the licensing requirements in terms of room sizes when before you purchase or before you try and proceed with a mortgage.
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of information. I mean, the government does publish a lot of information at national level, and then if you go drill down to the council level, then you can find out whether it's the same or whether they have tightened up. So there is a lot of information out there. I'm afraid it will take some time, but it's well worth it before you commit to buying something that you can't then use in the way you'd hoped, which is a real
or before you try and convert a standard residential into an HMO.
Well, that was the other thing I was going to ask. How does that work, Martin? If you've got a standard residential, you think, oh, maybe I could make it bigger and then turn it into an HMO, and that would be good business for me. Can you do that? And how can you do that?
Yeah, so the standard model, I think, is to use householder permitted development rights to extend the building. So you've probably all heard of the right to build a ground floor extension, a front porch, a dormer, roof extension, a side extension. All of that you can do under permitted development. You don't need planning permission. And they're rights intended for homeowners to expand their living space for their family and stuff. So what the common strategy seems to be is an investor will buy a 3-bedroom semi, and they'll build out to the side, out to the back. You can go up to 6 meters now at the back under certain circumstances. You can add almost an entire extra floor through a rear dormer. And you can get up easily to the 6 bedrooms you're allowed without planning permission, unless there's an Article 4. So you could have 6 double bedrooms, all en suite, a big downstairs, open plan, communal area, big garden, and so on. And do a kind of a high-end HMO. And if you're not in an Article 4 area, up to 6 people does not need planning permission for that. If you go more than that, some people then go to like a 10-bedroom HMO, really expand it to maximize the profit and the opportunity. But that, anything more than 7 or more, always requires planning permission. A larger HMO is a change of use, straightforward change of use from a family dwelling, and always requires planning permission. So you might not need planning permission for the extensions to create it. The physical works are lawful, but the change of use, the minute you move 10 people in, more than 6 people in, you've carried out a change of use. So you'd have a lawful building with maybe 10 ensuite bedrooms, but it's a family home until you get planning permission. It's not a sharer's thing. So that is an investment route.
Interesting. Tusha's clearly been thinking all this through. Angus, he's got a question on mortgages now. If I have a standard buy-to-let mortgage, I now have to get an HMO license. What needs to happen on the mortgage end as I'm 2 years into a 5-year fix? Oh, Angus.
I would expect that somewhere within your mortgage agreement, you would need to get permission from the lender for this. It's a bit like if you wanted to convert it into a holiday let or whatever. Have a chat with your lender, see what constraints they've got on that. Certainly when you're at the end of your 5-year fix, you're going to have to do it as an HMO mortgage. But your current lender could say no to you if they're not happy about the change of use.
Oh, that's interesting. We're just kind of coming up to the end now. Any more questions, please do pop them in the chat box or on the ask a question. I was just going to ask Angus generally about HMO buy-to-let mortgages. What's the difference in terms of the process and price?
Generally, you'll find they're slightly more expensive. The process is pretty similar, to be perfectly honest, except you're more likely to have a formal surveyor going around and doing the valuation rather than something which could be done as a desktop, which they might do if it's just a standard buy-to-let and they have sufficient information. So you may find it's a little more cumbersome. Certainly the legal side of it, they're going to want to check on license and planning requirements before you're going to get through. through the lender. So there's more in there. It is slightly more complicated, but my team are very proficient. They understand all the rules regarding HMOs and they're willing to help you through.
Fantastic. He's just got another question specifically there for you, Angus, if you can see about lease extension.
I have a question. Is there something like this for a lease extension? I need to get mine done, but there's a whole mix of information. Have a call in, Tusha, and talk to us. You can normally get the lender to give you a bit more money to help you with a lease extension. So I would expect you can get a further advance in many situations for that, because the lender will see it as being in their interests for you to have a longer lease. If there's a challenge there, it adds more value to the property. There are some legal processes in terms of setting the valuation. I'm sure Martin can tell me a bit more about that, in terms of marriage value, in terms of working out what that lease extension will cost, and there's some process to go through there. I think you need to have owned the property for a couple of years before you actually have formal rights to a lease extension. Please correct me if I'm wrong. And but once you have done, you can then go through a process to get a valuation for that. But very happy to try and help you, Tusha, if you need some guidance on that.
Yeah, just so you can get us on info@property-master.com or ring our number, which is on the website. Well, we've really exhausted our time there with Martin. I think we worked you quite hard, Martin. Thank you so much. That was very interesting. And good luck with your book. Don't forget, you just go to Amazon and find it there.
So we've got a couple of questions.
David, actually, yes.
Does anybody here do support? Yeah, we can help you with supported accommodation. It is not a standard buy to let. It requires specialist lenders, but get in touch and we can assist you finding mortgages for supported accommodation, if that's your question, Rob.
Fantastic. And David as well, are there permitted development rights for commercial properties?
Yes, so there are limited permitted development rights to do things like extensions. And there are some for changes of use within commercial uses. So, for example, from a shop to an office or something like that. And there are new permitted development rights, relatively new permitted development rights, to allow you to change offices and other commercial premises into flats and houses. But that isn't automatic. You have to apply for prior approval, which is like a planning application, but a lot simpler. So it's a more kind of light touch approach. So if you have office space, you can convert it into residential, but you just need to get advice and look into this prior approval process.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. There's another one here, but they're coming in thick and fast. Robert here. I'm trying to sell a 6-bedroom student HMO in Uplands, Swansea. The buyer is concerned he may not get a license. I have had an HMO license since I purchased in 2015, and I've provided council tax bills since this date to show that it's been let for students with council tax exemption. Should I be concerned that I may not be able to sell it as an HMO? Martin, what's your view there?
Well, if it needs a license, then I think you would probably need to have that license in place to sell it, unless, of course, the buyer was willing to buy it and then do that work immediately on purchasing it to apply for the license. But I guess that might affect the value you'd achieve. The fact you mentioned that you haven't had a license and you've provided council tax bills and stuff, on the licensing side, you either need it or you don't. The fact that it's been a certain period of time and you can prove it's been a HMO before I don't think there's any kind of grandfathering rights as such. In planning, there is. In planning, if you've had something 10 years, it's generally safe. They can't ask for permission at that stage, or as long as you can prove it. But with licensing, I don't think it works like that. If you haven't had a license, you may still just now need one. And I imagine if you're selling as a HMO, it would be a lot easier if you could.
Well, just rereading what Robert's put, he says, I've had an HMO license since I purchased it in 2015.
Oh, sorry.
And so I think if he's had a license, it would be logical that could, the license would pass to the new purchaser.
I think, is there an issue sometimes around council asking when it is licensing, whether or not you are a fit and proper person to have a license, although I have no idea how they make that decision. But so it's something he will need to check, Robert, because that I don't know off the top of my head. That's the only thing I can think of that could be an issue.
Yeah, I mean, but if the property's been licensed, I see no reason why, the property would be a problem. Clearly, you're absolutely right, Christine. There is a check for somebody being a fit and proper person. So if you've been a bad landlord in the past and you're on some register, then they may not want to give you an HMO license. But assuming that's not the case, I can't see any reason why a council could refuse a license on a property where it's been licensed for the last 7 or 8 years. But the devil's always in the detail, and but you could always make it a condition of the sale that the guy can get a license if that and go through the process. Do you need to own the property before you apply for the license? Don't know. Planning, you don't need to own a property.
No, in planning it wouldn't matter at all, but it may be in licensing. I see David here has said that the license may be with the person. It may be in licensing, it's different. Maybe when you buy, you have to get a new license. I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, I think the license is with the person, not the property. But I think the concern, it depends what the concern was. If the concern was you wouldn't get a license for this particular property, then if it's had a license before, I think you could actually use that as an example and say, well, this has been licensed before. It's not a change. It's not a change for the property. It's just a change for the owner.
It's a change for the person with the license, and that might well be the issue, but it shouldn't be.
Unless the council's licensing requirements have just changed and the new buyer is thinking, oh, when this license comes to be renewed, I'll have to, it may be difficult for some reason.
Something for them to check, definitely. But yeah, but there would have to have been some sort of either an issue with the person or, as you say, change in the licensing regime.
But I would have thought if the buyer, if he can get through to the council for a conversation, as you say, it's sometimes difficult, should say, look, I'm looking to buy this. It's a licensed property. Would there be an impediment to me, getting a license? As long as he, would pass the fit and proper test, probably not.
Excellent. David just said, "Great David, book. Thank you for that."
As a personal request, if anybody does download the book and enjoys it, if you wouldn't mind leaving a review, it's just out this week. And it has 0 reviews so far. So I would be very flattered indeed if anybody would leave a review.
Fantastic. We'll definitely try and do that. I mean, Carol's just come on, but it's a licensing question. If fully managed by an estate agent, is the license with the person or the estate agent or letting agent, I guess? I'm not sure on that one, Angus, but I'm thinking it's the person who owns the property, isn't it?
Well, they can delegate stuff out to management to the estate agent, but I'm guessing that I'm not an expert on licensing either, so but I would think, Carol, that the license probably needs to be in the individual owner's name, but there may be some situations where you can have a manager of property who gets licensed, but we can look into that for you.
Yeah. But I think it may well, obviously, as we've been talking about, licensing is varying now from town to town. So it's something you're really going to have to check with your local authority. Fantastic. Well, lovely to have so many of you on the line. Thank you very much, Martin. All the best with the book.
Thank you very much.
I shall certainly be leaving a review. I encourage you all to do the same. And thank you, Angus. We'll send out a recording of today as well, and hope to see you back in July. I think we're looking actually specifically at commercial property and multi-unit buildings and so on, so hopefully that will be of interest to all of you. Angus, anything more you want to say before we close?
No, I think thanks, Martin. I think it's been very enlightening understanding some of the challenges that landlords have with HMOs. I think we're in a landscape that keeps evolving, both on a planning and licensing perspective, and it's difficult to get it right. And I think we've got to look back and say, it's actually quite complicated for a landlord to navigate, as we've seen from some of the questions, to navigate their way through. And they can, you can operate with all the best intentions and still come a cropper by the sound of it. So, look into the detail and be careful in terms of what you're doing, especially if you're buying a new property which you want to use as an HMO.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. See you all again soon next month. Take care.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
yes,
Thank you, Martin.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.